Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. A lone carpenter builds his dream home deep in the Virginia mountains until a ruthless HOA queen sets her sights on his land. Lies, forged maps, and legal warfare follow. But she picked the wrong man to corner. This is the story of a boundary and the battle to defend it. I bought those 15 acres in the mountains of Virginia 10 years ago, back when my knees didn't creak every morning and my hands still felt young enough to build something that would outlast me. It was nothing but forest then. Thick pines, stubborn oaks, a shallow creek cutting through the lower end of the land, and a silence so complete you could hear your own thoughts arguing with each other. I didn't want neighbors, and I definitely didn't want rules. I wanted space, wood, stone, and time. I got all four. I'm a carpenter by trade, the kind who still believes that if you rush a build, it remembers. So I didn't rush. I worked on the house on weekends, during vacations, sometimes by headlamp after work, when I couldn't stand the thought of leaving a joint unfinished. Every beam was cut by my hands. Every notch fit because I made it fit. 2 stories, log walls, a stone fireplace that took me an entire winter to get right. Over the years, I poured roughly $180,000 into it, not counting my labor. If I had counted that, the number would have scared me. 6 years into the build, trucks started appearing beyond the tree line on the far edge of my property. At first, I thought it was logging. Then the road came. Then houses. Too many. Too close together, identical in a way that made my teeth itch. Mountain Ridge Estates, the sign said, like slapping a poetic name on concrete made it noble. I shrugged and went back to my work. My land wasn't part of it. I'd checked that twice when I bought it, and once more when the development started creeping closer. A couple of years later, heavy machinery showed up again, this time closer than I liked. Excavators, concrete trucks, workers staking out something right along what I assumed was the boundary line. I walked over, boots muddy, curiosity outweighing irritation. One of the guys told me they were building a summer house for Mrs. Vernon. Guest place, pool, terrace, the works. He said it like it was nothing, like summer houses with pools just sprouted out of mountain soil naturally. It looked close, too close. But the old boundary markers had long since disappeared, swallowed by roots and time. I didn't know exactly where the line ran anymore. That bothered me enough to walk over to the biggest house at the edge of the development, the one that looked less like a home and more like a statement. That's where I met Priscilla Vernon. She listened to me with a smile that never reached her eyes. I asked politely whether the construction might be encroaching on my land. She cut me off before I finished the sentence, told me her late husband had been a developer, told me she knew exactly where her property ended, told me, in a tone usually reserved for unruly children and malfunctioning appliances, not to concern myself with matters above my understanding. Then she dismissed me without actually saying goodbye. I went back to my house angry, then annoyed with myself for being angry. I had a roof to finish, windows to install, a life I was building one joint at a time. I decided not to push it. Let sleeping dogs lie. Focus on what mattered. That was my second mistake. By year 8, the house was starting to look like a home. The log walls stood proud, the roof had its final layer of shingles, and the double-pane windows were finally sealed in place. I'd just finished the front steps that spring, thick planks of cedar I'd milled myself. Standing on that porch felt like standing at the edge of a hard-earned future. But peace, like anything real, never lasts when someone else decides it's inconvenient. It started with a letter. A crisp white envelope arrived one morning, stuck in my makeshift mailbox. Nothing fancy, just a steel box on a post. Inside was a notice from the county building inspector's office. An anonymous report had been filed alleging unpermitted construction. My heart jumped before my head caught up. I had every damn permit. The folder was thick enough to stop a bullet, tucked away in my workshop drawer. Still, I called the county office. Friendly voice on the line confirmed. Someone claimed I was building without approval. Inspector came out the next week. His name was Daryl, mid-50s, big gut, calluses like mine. Looks solid, he said after walking the place. Your permits are all valid and current. Someone's blowing smoke. He didn't say who filed the complaint, but he didn't have to. My eyes drifted over to the edge of my property, past the trees, to the roofline of Priscilla's summer palace. It had grown fast. Wrap-around deck, a ridiculous saltwater pool, solar panels. A guest house, she'd called it. I hadn't seen a single guest. 2 weeks later, a forestry enforcement agent showed up. I had just pulled up a stump when she introduced herself, clipboard in hand. Someone reported unauthorized deforestation. I almost laughed. I'd cut down exactly 8 trees over the past 2 years, none of them older than 20 years, all dead or diseased. She did her inspection, no violations. Next came the letterhead I'd been dreading, Mountain Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. It started off with mock civility. Dear Mr. Stone, we appreciate your contribution to the scenic character of the area, but quickly veered into passive-aggressive territory. They claimed my unfinished structure was a visual disturbance, lowering the aesthetic cohesion of their development. The letter demanded that I either enclose the site behind a privacy fence or expedite the construction to completion to reduce visual pollution. I laughed out loud. Then I read the fine print at the bottom just to be sure. As a reminder, non-compliance may result in community mediation. I tossed the letter into the fire pit and poured a shot of whiskey. The kicker: I wasn't a member of the HOA. My land had never been annexed, never part of the development. Legally, I had nothing to do with their rules, their meetings, or their delusions of architectural control. But that didn't stop them from trying to muscle in like I was a stray dog pissing on their picket fence. After that, the tension thickened. I'd spot unfamiliar cars parked along the gravel road near my lot line. People walking with clipboards, taking photos. I installed cameras, motion-sensing floodlights, bought myself a brand new pair of binoculars, and started returning the favor. One morning, I found a note shoved under a rock on my porch. This isn't your mountain. No signature. Printed text. Laminated, like someone was mass-producing warnings. That night, I sat by the fireplace and stared into the flames. I wasn't a paranoid man by nature, but I'd worked too hard and too long to let myself be pushed off what was mine. I'd built this place one board at a time. They wanted it gone. They were going to have to come with more than letters and laminated threats. But I knew one thing for sure. Someone had decided I was the problem, and she lived just across the invisible line that separated my forest from her fantasy. The visit happened on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet weekday when you don't expect trouble because trouble usually prefers an audience. I was fitting trim around one of the downstairs windows when I heard tires crunching on the gravel drive. Not one vehicle, 3. I stepped outside and wiped my hands on my jeans. Priscilla Vernon got out first, perfectly dressed, sunglasses on, posture straight, like she was walking into a boardroom instead of a half-finished log house. Behind her came 2 men. One wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. The other had a neon vest folded over his arm and a long metal case I recognized immediately: surveying equipment. She smiled the way people do when they believe the outcome is already decided. "Mr. Stone," she said, not waiting for me to answer, "we need to talk." The man in the suit introduced himself as her attorney. The other barely nodded, already scanning the property like he owned it. Priscilla explained in a voice sweet enough to rot teeth that there had been a concerning discovery regarding property boundaries. Apparently, out of the kindness of her heart, she had commissioned a professional survey after multiple complaints raised questions about my build. The surveyor opened a folder and handed me a stack of papers. Diagrams, measurements, coordinates, official-looking stamps. According to their report, nearly half of my house, 40% to be exact, sat on land belonging to Mountain Ridge Estates. I felt my stomach drop, but my hand stayed steady. I studied the papers. The lines didn't make sense. Angles were wrong. Distances felt stretched, like someone had pulled the map until it told the story they wanted. Priscilla leaned in. "I know this is a shock. Believe me, I sympathize. 10 years is a long time to build something." She paused, just long enough for it to sting. "Which is why I'm offering solutions." She laid them out clean and simple. Option 1. I demolish the encroaching portion of the structure at my own expense and restore the land to its original condition. Option 2. I sell her the entire parcel, land and house, for $50,000, and she would handle the legal mess herself. I actually laughed. It came out short and sharp, surprising even me. $50,000, I said. "I've spent over 3 times that just on materials." She shrugged. "Considering the circumstances, it's generous. Once this goes to court, you may lose everything." The attorney cleared his throat, the sound of rehearsed concern. "You have 1 week to decide." They didn't wait for my response. The surveyor packed his tools. Priscilla adjusted her sunglasses and walked back to her car like she'd just closed a deal. I stood there long after the engines disappeared down the road, the papers fluttering in my hands. For the first time since I'd bought the land, doubt crept in. Not panic. Panic is loud. But something colder. The idea that 10 years of work could be erased with a forged line on a map. That night, I sat alone by the unfinished fireplace. The logs cracked and shifted, settling into place like they trusted the foundation beneath them. I trusted mine too much to take Priscilla's word for it. She had money, lawyers, and confidence. I had permits, receipts, and something else she didn't count on. The next morning, I made a call to a licensed surveyor with a reputation for being painfully honest. If someone was going to redraw my world, it wasn't going to be her. His name was Ted Marshall. Late 50s, sun-leathered face, beard like steel wool, and a gait that said he didn't waste time pretending to be friendly. He showed up 2 days after I called in a beat-up silver pickup packed with gear, maps, and coffee-stained blueprints of the surrounding parcels. He didn't smile much, which I liked. Meant he was here to work, not to talk me into anything. "You want this done right," he said. "I'll need 2 full days, maybe 3. "I want it done honest," I replied. That seemed to please him more than a handshake. He started immediately, setting up tripods, hauling out old property plats, using satellite overlays, and something that looked like a Star Wars prop to shoot distances through the trees. I followed him around, mostly quiet, though I couldn't help but ask now and then, "That look right to you?" Or, "How far off could she be?" He didn't answer until the second day, near sundown. We were standing at the northwest corner of my lot, where the tree line dipped before climbing back toward the ridge. That's where he found it, buried under 6 inches of soil and pine needles. An iron stake, corroded but intact, marked 1987. "This here," he said, tapping it with the butt of a screwdriver. "This is an original boundary marker, set by the county back when the lots were split off from timberland. You can fake a lot of things, Mr. Stone, but not time." He found 3 more by the end of the day, spaced just right, forming the same perimeter I remembered from my purchase documents a decade ago. By the 3rd afternoon, Ted had all the data crunched. He pulled out his laptop and showed me the map he'd built. Clean, precise, marked with GPS data and legal coordinates. My house sat comfortably inside my parcel. Every board, every nail, every inch of it was on my land. But there was a wrinkle. "Now," Ted said, pointing to the eastern edge of the map where her so-called summer cottage was drawn like a swollen tick, This is not her land." I leaned in. What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "her guest house. Pool, terrace, retaining wall, even that cute little gazebo, 90% of it is planted square on your property. Her contractors didn't just build close. They built way the hell over." He flipped to a page of measurements. "This right here, that pool deck. That's 34 feet into your land." It took a full minute for my brain to catch up. I'd been so busy defending myself, I hadn't even considered that she might be the one trespassing. I stared at the map, then at Ted. "She made this whole thing up to force me to sell." He nodded once. "Or to get you to tear your place down. Easier to steal ground than give it back." I asked him if he could put everything into an official report. Not just a casual, "Yeah, looks good," but a formal survey with stamps, witness statements, coordinates, and the kind of cold, objective detail that lawyers can't wiggle around. "Already drafting it," he said. "And I've got photos of all 4 markers. Time-stamped. You want, I'll file it with the county for you." He did. And just like that, the truth wasn't just a suspicion. It was on record. The next morning, I didn't wait. I printed out 2 copies of Ted's full report, bound them in plastic, and walked straight to Priscilla's front door. She answered in a silk robe like I'd interrupted her at a spa retreat instead of her porch in rural Virginia. "Mr. Stone," she said coolly, "I assume you've come to accept my offer." "No," I said, and handed her the binder. She flipped through it. I watched her face drain of color. She kept going, page after page, slower now. Then she looked up, her voice sharp. "This is fabricated. That's a certified state-licensed survey with photographic evidence and matching county markers. My geodetic specialist has over 30 years of experience." "Then either he's blind," I said, "or he's a fraud." She bristled. "You're trying to extort me." "No," I said. "I'm trying to handle this like an adult. You acknowledge the mistake, and we figure out a way to resolve this without going nuclear. You've been using my land for over 4 years. I have the right to sue for trespass, restitution, and property damage, but I'm offering you a way out." "And what is it you propose?" "You admit the error. We draw up a lease for the land you're occupying. You pay for usage. We settle it quietly. No court." There was a long pause. I thought maybe she'd surprise me, that she'd weigh her options and do the reasonable thing. Then she said, "You're trespassing. Get off my property." I turned without another word and walked away. Lines in the dirt. Some people cross them without blinking. Some of us build houses to defend them. It began quietly. No declarations of war, no flaming arrows, just a series of small, deliberate acts that turned my home into a battleground. Priscilla had rejected my peace offering, and now it was clear she'd chosen a different route. Pressure me until I broke. Thing is, I don't break easy. The first salvo came in the form of a legal envelope slid under my workshop door. Civil suit, filed by the Mountain Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, represented, naturally, by her same slick attorney. The claim: I was engaged in unlawful construction on property belonging to the HOA. Their request: immediate demolition of the structure in violation and financial restitution for damages to the visual harmony and community value. I remember sitting at my workbench, reading through the pages with the same calm I use when checking for dry rot. My name was all over that document. Their version of the boundary line, the fake one, was pasted in like gospel. It was laughable, except now it wasn't just a nuisance. It was a court date. Then came the petition. I found it taped to my gate one morning, printed on glossy HOA letterhead with gold foil edges. "Protect our mountain view," it said at the top. 25 names were listed, residents of Mountain Ridge, demanding the removal of my eyesore of a construction project. Some of those names belonged to people I'd never even spoken to. One was a woman who'd once asked me if she could photograph my log railing for her Pinterest. Traitors, all of them. Then came the complaints. Fire code violations, environmental damage, noise. Each one brought an inspection. The fire marshal showed up twice, walking around with a clipboard, checking my outdoor burn barrel and fire breaks. I passed both times, but the stress built like water behind a dam. A week later, I came home late from a supply run and saw something glinting on the side of the house. Spray paint, neon orange, sloppy capital letters big enough to read from the road, "Get out." I froze. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't surprised. And that scared me more than anything. I spent that night reviewing camera footage. I'd installed motion-activated cams a few months earlier, just in case. At 3:26 a.m., a pickup truck pulled up near the tree line. A figure got out, hooded, moved fast, carried a can. The plates were fuzzy, but I got enough to run a partial through a local contact I knew from back when I did volunteer search and rescue. The truck belonged to someone named Julio Ramirez. It took me about 30 seconds to connect that name to someone I'd seen watering rose bushes next to Priscilla's mailbox, her gardener. I didn't go to the sheriff yet. I saved the footage, backed it up, and sent a copy to my lawyer with the subject line, "New hobby, HOA-sponsored vandalism." But Priscilla wasn't done. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from the county zoning office. Someone had submitted a request to designate a fire access road through my property. The request had gone through initial review and was scheduled for public hearing. The proposed path ran straight across my western slope, the one I used for stacking wood, drying timber, and hunting in the fall. A dotted red line cut through my land like it owed them passage. It took me less than 10 minutes to figure out who filed it. The HOA. More specifically, Priscilla Vernon on behalf of the community. She claimed the route was essential for emergency response times and a critical safety measure given the increased fire risk in the area. What she didn't mention: her summer house with the illegal pool was landlocked, cut off from the rest of the HOA by my property. She'd built herself into a corner and now wanted me to give her a road out. I went to the zoning office in person, brought Ted's report, showed them boundary lines, marker photos, and the fact that I wasn't part of the HOA, never had been. The clerk behind the desk blinked twice and muttered, "Jesus." They froze the application pending investigation. The siege wasn't just legal, it was psychological. I started seeing HOA board members walking their dogs suspiciously close to my lot. My mail got delayed. Packages vanished. I even found a copy of the HOA bylaws slipped into my toolbox one morning, like they thought I just needed a little light reading to come around. And still, I didn't retaliate. Not yet. Instead, I hired an attorney. Her name was Nina Calloway, sharp as a chisel with a spine like tempered steel. I gave her every document, every photo, every email. She read in silence for 20 minutes before saying, She's trying to bully you off your own land." "No shit," I muttered. "Well, Mr. Stone," she said, flipping to the last page, "how do you feel about going to war?" Within a week, we filed a countersuit. Trespassing, illegal structure, property theft, 4 years of unauthorized land use at $2,000 per year, vandalism tied to the gardener via video evidence, emotional distress. The whole thing totaled just over $32,000. Not enough to ruin Priscilla, but enough to hurt. And, more importantly, enough to make her play defense for once. As a final stroke, Nina requested a court-ordered independent survey conducted by a state-certified official. No ties to me, no ties to her, just facts. We got the court date. And suddenly the air shifted. The HOA stopped sending letters. No new complaints arrived, no new graffiti. It felt like the eye of the storm, and I knew better than to trust calm when the other side still had weapons. When the state surveyor arrived, I watched from my porch. He didn't say much, just nodded and got to work. 3 days of measurements, reference checks, legal map comparisons. He barely spoke a dozen words to me. But on the 4th day, he handed me a copy of the preliminary report. I didn't even have to read past the first paragraph. All existing structures constructed by Mr. Stone are located entirely within his legal parcel boundaries. I read the next line twice. Structure referred to as Summer Guest House, owned by Mountain Ridge HOA, is located approximately 87% within the property lines of Mr. Stone. I closed the file. I didn't laugh. I didn't shout. I just walked inside, cracked a beer, and sat by the fireplace I'd built with my bare hands. She wanted war. She was about to get justice instead. Courtrooms don't look like justice. They look like beige carpets, flickering fluorescent lights, and tired people in mismatched suits pretending they aren't bored. But on the morning of my hearing, as I sat beside Nina Calloway, flipping through our stack of files, I felt something close to clarity. Not confidence, not yet, but readiness. We weren't here to make noise. We were here to bury a lie with evidence. Across the room sat Priscilla Vernon, every inch the polished villain, pearls, posture, that tight-lipped composure of someone who can't believe the world is daring to question her. Her lawyer looked less confident than last time. He'd seen the state survey. He knew. The judge was a woman in her 60s, the kind of no-nonsense presence you don't interrupt unless you enjoy being incinerated by a glance. She opened the session by reading both claims aloud, hers against me, mine against her. Then it started. Priscilla's side went first. Her lawyer trotted out at the same tired argument. My house was illegally built on HOA land. It was a visual and environmental blight. She had relied on expert surveys and acted in good faith. He submitted their original report, the fake one, and tried to frame me as a reclusive and uncooperative landowner with a history of antagonism toward the community. It was almost impressive how calmly he lied. Then came Nina, and Nina came loaded. She walked the court through Ted's certified survey, then the independent state report, then the property markers, original 1987 iron stakes, photos, timestamps. She entered a detailed timeline showing that Priscilla's guest house, pool, and terrace had all been built after the HOA's founding, and without proper boundary verification. She submitted the drone footage, the vandalism photos, and the security footage linking the gardener to the spray paint attack. But the real dagger came when she introduced Exhibit K, a printed application for the fire access road, filed with the county using a falsified HOA map showing my land as part of their territory. The signature, Priscilla Vernon. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Vernon, did you submit this application?" Priscilla lifted her chin. "I did." "Were you aware this parcel does not belong to your homeowners association?" A pause. "I believed it did at the time." The judge flipped through the state survey again. "According to official documentation, your belief was incorrect. So I ask again, did you knowingly submit a false boundary map to secure access over someone else's land?" Her lawyer interrupted with an objection, something about ambiguity of ownership and reliance on old documents, but the judge cut him off. "Counselor, your client built a structure on land she didn't own, attempted to acquire more land through regulatory deception, and is now suing the rightful landowner for what amounts to property theft in reverse." I could almost hear Nina smiling. Then came Priscilla's last play. She stood up herself, dismissed her attorney's warning glance, and spoke directly. "This is my husband's land," she said, her voice trembling just enough to suggest practiced grief. "He bought it over 20 years ago before he passed. I trusted the records he left. I did not set out to deceive anyone, but I have invested heavily into a property I believed was rightfully mine." The judge nodded slowly. "Can you produce proof of that purchase?" Priscilla blinked. "Excuse me?" "Title deed, mortgage record, tax history, anything showing your husband owned the parcel in question." There was silence. Then Priscilla's lawyer stood again, flustered, and mumbled something about the parcel being adjacent and the documents possibly having been misfiled. The judge tapped her pen. "Then let me clarify. You have no legal documentation that this land ever belonged to your husband, yourself, or the HOA." No answer. Then the judge said, "We're done here." Her ruling was swift and clean. Priscilla's claim was dismissed in full. My counterclaim was upheld. The court officially recognized the structure known as Summer Guest Cottage and Pool as unlawfully constructed on private property without consent or compensation. The HOA was ordered to remove the structure within 90 days at their own expense or surrender it in full to me. Additional penalties were awarded: $8,000 for 4 years of illegal land use, $3,500 for documented vandalism damage, $25,000 for emotional distress, legal fees, and malicious interference. Total $32,500 payable within 30 days. Priscilla didn't look at me as the judge finalized the ruling. Her lips were pressed so tight I half expected her face to fold in on itself. Afterward, Nina and I walked out into the sunlight. She lit a cigarette and exhaled like she'd just finished gutting a deer. "That felt good," she said. I didn't answer. I was watching Priscilla through the glass doors, still seated at her table, motionless. She looked smaller than usual, not broken, just cornered. For the first time, I saw something close to fear behind her eyes, but I knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. The clock had started ticking. She had 90 days to make a choice: walk away from her fantasy, or watch it fall brick by brick. For 90 days, nothing happened. No trucks, no demolition crews, no apology. The pool remained, shimmering like nothing had changed. The summer house lights still flicked on at dusk, automated like clockwork. From my porch, I could still hear the faint hum of her HVAC, cooling a building that legally no longer belonged to her. It was a strange purgatory, waiting for justice to finish its work. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was still processing. Maybe she'd hire a crew last minute and erase the monument to her hubris before the deadline struck. But that wasn't Priscilla's way. She was stalling, refusing, hoping I'd blink first. What she didn't realize is I don't blink. Day 89, I sent a certified letter to her lawyer, no response. Day 90, I drove to the county office, handed over the court ruling, and filed the transfer paperwork. With no demolition completed and no payment tendered, the structure legally became mine. That included the pool, the foundation, the plumbing, the gaudy patio furniture, all of it. The county processed the claim without comment. They'd seen the ruling. It was airtight. I drove back up the ridge, stepped onto the edge of her former paradise, and walked the perimeter. My boots kicked pebbles across her fake stone path. Every step felt heavier, not with dread, but with weight. Consequence. I stood by the pool for a long time. Clear, still water, an empty wine glass on the table, sun-bleached towels folded in a rack. It was like she expected to return at any moment, pour herself a rosé, and pretend the world hadn't shifted under her. Instead, she got an email. Subject line: new ownership. Demolition begins Monday. The crew arrived 3 days later. 4 guys in denim and dust-covered caps contracted out of Staunton. I stood with the foreman that morning and pointed to the structure. "Everything goes," I said. "No salvage, no resale. Strip it down. Fill the pool." He squinted. "Even the hot tub?" "Especially the hot tub." It took 3 days. First came the deck. Planks ripped up like rotten teeth, revealing rusted nails and mold where water had pooled. Then the guest house. Walls torn down to skeletons, glass shattered into sand. The pool was last. They drained it, jackhammered the lip, and filled the pit with truckloads of earth and gravel. By the end of the week, it looked like nothing had ever stood there. I sent her photos. No message. Just the before and after. I don't know what I expected. Rage, threats, another letter, but what I got was silence. That silence lasted for 2 weeks. Then the signs started to appear. Literally, signs. Taped to power poles, stuck in mailboxes, posted online. HOA special meeting, emergency vote. Topic: misuse of community funds. Turns out, not all her neighbors were thrilled to discover Priscilla had spent $45,000 in HOA legal fees fighting a case that had nothing to do with common property. She dipped into reserve funds, disguised her personal legal battle as an HOA concern, and billed it as a zoning defense expense. Once word got out, the knives came out fast. Within a month, a petition circulated, a real one this time. More than 60% of the HOA residents signed to remove her from the presidency. She fought it, of course, claimed she was targeted, slandered, misunderstood, but the vote was final. Priscilla Vernon was ousted, just like that. The next week, her house went on the market. 5-bedroom colonial, panoramic views, modern kitchen, but the listing didn't mention the court case, or the filled-in pool, or the fact that every neighbor now looked at her like she was a cautionary tale. She was gone by Christmas, packed up in silence. No goodbye. I watched the moving van from my porch. She never looked my way, never even stepped near the boundary again. Good. I didn't need an apology. I had closure. The day after she left, I walked down to the now empty plot where her guest house once stood. It was quiet. Just wind in the trees, the crunch of boots in gravel, the distant chirp of a hawk circling above. I knelt and picked up a piece of her patio stone. Flat, smooth, sun-warmed. I brought it back up the hill and used it as a stepping stone at the base of the path to my house. Then I called a local nursery and ordered 12 saplings, apple trees, hardy ones. I planted them where the pool had been, one by one, each with a name carved on a marker: truth, patience, boundaries, stone, justice. I didn't name the last one. It didn't need one. They'll bear fruit in 3 years. But I'm patient. The following spring came early that year. Snow melted fast, runoff carving narrow ribbons through the moss-covered rocks at the bottom of the hill. Birds returned like they never left, filling the morning with a rhythm that reminded me why I'd bought this land in the first place. Peace, not silence. Stillness, not emptiness. I'd finished the interior of the house by then. 10 years and a few thousand scars later, I finally stood inside the home I had built with my own hands. Real wood, real stone, real work. Every surface told a story. Every corner had a memory pressed into it like a thumbprint in wet clay. But what pulled me most wasn't inside. It was the orchard. Where the guest house used to stand, the apple saplings had taken root. Skinny trunks, stubborn little leaves, branches that trembled in the wind like kids trying to stand tall too soon. I visited them each morning, checked the roots, cleared the weeds, spoke to them sometimes, not because I thought they'd hear me, but because I knew I had something worth tending. I called it the Orchard of Boundaries. Quiet joke, sharp truth. People in town started hearing about what happened. The case had made some noise. Local paper ran a story. Man reclaims land from HOA after legal battle turns tables. Folks I'd never met started waving when they passed on the road. One guy even dropped off a 6-pack of local cider and said, "That was for all of us." Apparently Priscilla had made enemies beyond my tree line. The Mountain Ridge HOA tried to recover. They elected some mild-mannered guy named Richard as the new president, and to his credit, he sent me a letter. Apologized for the misallocation of funds and previous leadership's hostile approach. Asked if I'd be open to building a better relationship between our community and your property. I didn't respond. I had no interest in relationships built on retroactive guilt. The apology wasn't for me. It was for optics. But they stayed out of my business after that, and that was enough. Then, 1 month later, I got a letter. No return address, no stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten, brief. "Mr. Stone, I regret how things transpired, but I don't regret defending what I thought was mine. You won this round, but not all stories end where you think they should. Sincerely, Penelope Vaughn." Penelope Vaughn. I read the name twice, then once more for the echo. Didn't recognize it. I folded the note, walked it down to the burn barrel, and dropped it in. It didn't matter if it was her. And if it was, well, I wasn't hard to find. But I wasn't the same man anymore. She'd spent 4 years trying to erase my work, and all she did was carve me sharper. Now, the land knows me. The lines are clean. The orchard's growing. One morning, I saw Ted Marshall again. He'd driven up to check a neighboring parcel, stopped by to say hello. We stood looking at the trees, coffee in hand, boots sunk in the damp earth. "You sure she's gone for good?" he asked. I shrugged. "Karen always comes back, sometimes with a new haircut and a fake name." He chuckled. "What are you going to do if she tries something again?" I looked out at the saplings, already taller than when I planted them. "Same thing I always do," I said. "Measure twice, cut once." We stood in silence a while, watching the wind bend the branches. Behind us, the house stood still and solid, not a single inch out of place.